Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos and welcome to This Week in Mythic Plus. This week's affixes are Fortified, Spiteful, Volcanic, and of course Prideful. This is one of the push weeks on the calendar for high key groups. It's not the best on the calendar, but it is one of the better ones for the purposes of pushing high keys. It's got the combination of Fortified and none of the affixes that really slow down keys. The bolsterings, the necrotics, that kind of stuff, right? None of that's active this week, but Spiteful is active, and of the affixes that are going on this week, it's going to be Spiteful that causes the most problems for the most groups. And really what it's going to come down to is how many melee players are in your group. That's the kind of the big question. 90% of this week's difficulty is going to be based on your answer to that question. If you have a group where the only melee player in your group is the tank, this is going to be a breeze, because Spiteful is pretty easy to deal with if you're ranged, if they target your range and are almost dead by the time they would reach them anyways. And Volcanic is pretty much a non-affix. It's as close to a non-affix as we get. So that's a really, really, really favorable group prompt for this week. But by contrast, if your group is, a melee healer like a Holy Paladin and 3 melee DPS and a tank, particularly if you're not, really well coordinated, and depending on which dungeon you're doing, that can be really, really, really tough. And Spiteful can cause a lot of problems because it can 1 or 2 shot many players to your group, depending on what key level you're playing at and how much gear and what specs folks are playing as well. So it's going to be a very different experience depending on how you do there. It's going to be hard to find groups this week as a melee player through the LFG system compared to as a ranged player, compared to normal weeks. So my advice is if you are one of those melee players, you're looking to do some keys this week, maybe consider creating the groups rather than applying to them. That's almost always the best way to get ahead in the group finder system, but especially whenever supply and demand tilts against you, as it really kind of always is for DPS, but this week in particular for melee, that's going to be the life you'll lead. In terms of the routes this week, so again, we are back in a situation where we are in a week where we've already had a This Week in Mythic Plus video. You can go watch that one if you'd like to hear me talk about each dungeon. This week, instead, I'll just give a brief overview of a couple of specific spots that should help prepare you for your keys this week. And let's start off by just saying, if you're interested in any of the routes that I have one with and without skips for every dungeon. You can find it at Raider.io. There will be a link in the description below. You can grab those and let me know how they work out for you. I've made a couple of small changes this week. Well, not huge ones. So Halls of Atonement, the with skips route, it's alternating between Tyrannical and Fortified, which route we're doing basically, where the Tyrannical one is going to try really hard to set up a Pride onto both of these first 2 bosses, whereas the Fortified one says, whatever, we'll just lust a trash pull at the start and get only one of these 2 bosses with Pride on it. So that's going to happen every week is the plan. We'll alternate between those 2 as Tyrannical and Fortified switch. Then I've also changed the Spires of Ascension with skips route. Basically, I've broken up some pulls and changed the notes to say you can combine them, whereas before, all the pulls in this area were combined with notes saying that you could break them up. I've kind of split those up so that the easier ones are the ones that are more common to combine, are that by default, and then the harder ones are the ones that are split up by default and they have a note that says to combine. So not a functional difference in the route if you are reading the notes, but a lot of people don't read the notes, so defaults are pretty important actually for this route, and hopefully these are ones that will serve you well. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go dungeon. We're not going to cover necessarily every dungeon, but a couple of specific points that I want to point out in some of these dungeons. First off is in Spires of Ascension, and this is illustrative of something that happens in a lot of dungeons, but it's especially true in Spires, where Spiteful, the scariest Spiteful moment is going to be when you kill one mob first in a group, say the squad leaders, which are very common kill targets in these pulls, and then you still have 4 actual mobs to deal with, and a Spiteful Shade at the same time. That is a great time to save your AoE stuns for. And this is true in every single dungeon this week, saving AoE stuns for if a mob is going to die prior to all the other mobs in a pull, or if several mobs will die and there will still be some left alive, landing the AoE stun onto both the Spitefuls and the mobs that are still alive in the pack. It's going to make that a lot easier than firing them off on pull, which you may be used to, or trying to save them for the Spiteful Shades at the end. Because Spiteful Shades, when there's just 3 Spiteful Shades and no mobs, you just run away from them, right? You're nothing bad's going to happen to you from just running away from those Spiteful Shades. It's really a dangerous affix when there are still mobs involved in the pull as well. So consider saving stuff for those moments in these pulls. In Spires in particular, with Fortified active, these are some of the trickiest pulls in the dungeon and will absolutely require a lot of commitment of resources to get through. A couple other things to note. Plaguefall. I say this basically every week that there's a non-death affix, but it's worth repeating it because it catches people out every week as well, which is that these gushing slimes do trigger on death affixes, which means if you run in here and you kill 10 of these things, you're going to have 10 Spiteful Shades chasing after you. That's still a good plan. You should still do that if you can. You should kill as many of them as you can. Just be aware that there's about to be a bunch of Spiteful Shades. If you have melee DPS in the group, they need to be ready to book it as stuff starts dying, or use AoE stuns, of course, and Ring of Peace effects like that, Binding Shot. Those abilities in general are extremely powerful this week. Anything like a Ring of Peace, a Binding Shot, to control the Spiteful Shades in particular towards the end of the pull. Although, of course, you got to use them on the mob abilities. That's a good idea, too. Another thing to mention, Mysterion Scythe. This is a good dungeon most weeks. It's still a good dungeon this week. Just remember that the maze, you're going to have to wait for the stupid Spiteful Shades to die before you can activate the next doorway. Very annoying. Not much actionable advice there, but figured it's worth pointing out before the key starts. And another key I wanted to point out as being a particularly tough one is Sanguine Depths. This is a spot where, the Spiteful Shades will spawn and you actually don't have much space to kite them naturally. So you're going to be more reliant on abilities to manage Spiteful rather than just running away from them in a couple spots. So be aware of that. Save stuff for those if needed. Or fight the pack in a spot where, if you drag the pack a little bit in one direction, right, 20 yards in one direction or the other, that can create enough of a space for you to kite in the other direction. Better than fighting something like in the middle of, particularly if there's a patrol behind you, getting all the way to one side rather than fighting in the middle of two patrols is going to give you more space to kite in the other direction. It's a tough dungeon, though. Tough affix for this dungeon. And then the final thing I want to point out is Halls of Atonement. Echelon. This boss, if you have ads alive during the AoE stun, you can get in Volcanic Trouble. Volcanic Trouble is not something that is very common. Last time we had it, last expansion, there was like Jess Howlis. You could theoretically get in Volcanic Trouble as well during the stun, although there was only one mob from which Volcanic spawned. But here you can actually get in more trouble, and to understand exactly how it works, you actually need to understand the Volcanic affix, which a lot of people don't know exactly how it works behind the hood. The way it works is your chance to spawn volcanoes is based on the number of enemies that you're in combat with. Every enemy that you're in combat with will try to spawn volcanoes, and when they do spawn a volcano, they will target somebody that is not in melee range of them. So there's a couple of ways to counterplay this. The first and best way is just to kill all the ads quickly before the stun comes out and you have volcanoes under you. Great. If you're doing that, perfect. And a lot of groups are doing that. You don't have to worry. But sometimes towards the end of this fight, you'll have nothing left in the tank and get in a little bit of trouble there. So consider making sure that you have damage for the imps. Other options are making sure that you're in melee range, actually, of several of the enemies that as you're getting stunned. Because if you're in melee range of 5 enemies and at range of 2 enemies, there's only actually 2 of the 7 volcano spawners that could target you. And so that will make it a lot less likely that you get destroyed during the stun. And then the other option, of course, is to have immunities or defensives or a dispel, dispel the priest, and then they can life grip somebody who's in danger. Just panic button type options, having them available for the stun. Of course, you always want to have a way to dispel the person who is targeted, but potentially having another way to bail out somebody that is being volcanic attacked. It's not something that'll happen commonly, but it is something that can happen on this boss, so do watch out for it. Or don't, and just, if it happens, complain about it. It's a fine option as well. It's pretty rare, but figured it was something I would equip you for if you're interested. All right, that's it. That's my tips for the dungeons this week. Should be a pretty good week for some Mythic Plus, so let me know how it goes. Hope you enjoyed this video, and hit like and subscribe and stuff. Come check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Ratnos. Hoping to stream some keys this week, so that might be I haven't done too many this season so far, so it should be a good time. Of course, I also stream Raid. And yeah, hit the subscribe and stuff. I think I already said all this, so I'm gonna get out of here. Thanks everybody for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.